A wealthy man decided to disguise himself as a beggar to find a wife through a beauty contest. Suddenly, a line of beautiful women could be seen in front of a grand television studio in Rio de Janeiro. Curious passers-by wondered what all these women, so carefully made up and extravagantly dressed, were waiting for outside the gate. Those who stopped to watch witnessed the high-heeled march of the 27 women entering the grand studio. Each of these women was preparing to compete in a fiercely contested beauty pageant, representing a Brazilian state and bringing with them a touch of their region's cultural heritage. What none of these women could have imagined was that, in addition to competing for the crown, they were also unwittingly part of another competition. Samuel, the youngest son of the television network's owner, wanted to marry a beautiful woman but was tired of the superficial relationships that came with his wealth. Used to getting whatever he wanted, he decided that his future wife would be one of the contestants in his father's televised beauty contest. However, Samuel didn't want to marry just any beautiful woman, she had to be uninterested in his money. He knew that once the women discovered who his father was, many would be eager to marry him solely for his wealth. At 35 years old, Samuel was ready to settle down, but he didn't want his marriage to be based on financial interest. Although he was attractive and charming, he had never felt that any woman had a sincere interest in him. His father's money always seemed to get in the way. As Samuel prepared to put his plan into action, Christina, the production assistant responsible for organizing the beauty contest, was busy giving instructions to the 27 women. At 30 years old, Christina was often preoccupied with her messy hair, usually going without makeup and wearing wrinkled or tattered clothes. It was ironic that someone like her, who cared so little about appearances, was assigned to work on a beauty contest. Christina's job was to guide the contestants and relay the filming schedule to them. The big night of the contest was only 2 days away, and all the participants needed to film some special segments for the show. These recordings included outdoor shoots, with the next one scheduled at a park near the studio. The idea was for the women, wearing sashes of their respective states, to talk about themselves in front of the camera and explain to the judges and the audience why they believed they should win. Christina struggled to make herself heard as she tried to keep the contestants in line, but most of the women were more focused on scrutinizing each other's flaws or strengths than on listening to her. However, not all the contestants were indifferent or rude to Christina. Gabriella and Lays were disciplined and very polite, always paying attention and asking questions to avoid any issues. Secretly, or perhaps not so secretly, Christina hoped that one of these two would win the crown. With much effort, Christina managed to get all 27 contestants into the vans that would take them to the park. Even though the location was close to the studio, it was important to have motorized transportation. The contestants couldn't arrive sweaty or too tired, they needed to look their best in front of the cameras. Meanwhile, Samuel enlisted the help of his father's network's makeup and costume experts to disguise himself as a beggar. His plan was to blend in with the park's surroundings and observe how the contestants reacted to a homeless man. To complete his disguise, Samuel used makeup to make his face look dirty and wore old, tattered clothes that were sourced from the network's costume department. The transformation gave him a new perspective on how actors might feel when getting into character for a role. As the park filming progressed, the atmosphere was chaotic, as was typical for such productions. Some contestants found the most absurd reasons to pick on each other, turning the competition into a battleground. Christina, caught in the middle, did her best to maintain peace among the participants, though it often felt like a nearly impossible task. At one point, Christina was distracted by trying to understand how Maria Luisa, one of the contestants, had managed to break the zipper on another contestant's dress with just a handbag. These kinds of underhanded tactics were new to Christina, who had previously only worked on crime shows for a rival network. Sometimes, the women vying for the beauty crown seemed more dangerous than some of the infamous criminals she had covered. While comforting Julia, the contestant with the broken dress, Christina didn't notice when a beggar approached the filming area. Since they were filming in a public park, it wasn't possible to keep curious onlookers away, but the producers hadn't anticipated that a homeless man would try to interact with the contestants. Maria Luisa, the handbag-wielding troublemaker, was the first to notice the shabby man lingering nearby. She even thought he was somewhat handsome but quickly dismissed him as a nobody. With a sneer, Maria Luisa pointed at the man and said to Christina, "Look, there's a beggar hanging around the filming. Get rid of that thing immediately." Christina, already tired of the women's haughty attitudes, glanced in the direction Maria Luisa was pointing. With a calm breath, Christina replied, "That man isn't bothering anyone, and this park is public, he has as much right to be here as we do." Unconvinced, Maria Luisa muttered that she would complain to the show's director. At that moment, Christina questioned what she was doing with her career, knowing that she would soon have to endure a long lecture from Carlos, the director. Carlos was a middle-aged man who never dated women over 25, obsessed with his own appearance. He had undergone nearly every cosmetic procedure available to keep his skin looking young and his appearance refreshed. However, the result of so many procedures was a face that looked tight and expressionless. It didn't take long after Maria Luisa mentioned Carlos for him to appear to check on how the filming was going. The beggar was still hanging around the set, but most of the contestants either ignored him or treated him poorly. When Carlos arrived, he didn't immediately notice the unusual figure among the crowd. However, Maria Luisa quickly ran over to complain about the beggar's presence and added that Christina had refused to remove him. With an unhappy look, Carlos turned to Christina and asked why she was being so lax, warning her that many people would love to have her job. Timidly, still trying to fix Julia's zipper, Christina explained that she valued the opportunity but couldn't remove someone from a public place. Moreover, she pointed out that different media outlets were covering the filming, and if they forced a beggar to leave, it would be all over social media in seconds. Realizing that the often disheveled assistant was right, Carlos reluctantly told Maria Luisa that it was best to ignore the beggar. Meanwhile, the beggar, who was actually Samuel in disguise, had already wandered around the entire filming area, taking advantage of the fact that most contestants ignored him. He eavesdropped on their conversations, but for the most part, they only talked about trivial matters or criticized their competitors. There wasn't much worth paying attention to. The most interesting conversation Samuel overheard was when the disheveled assistant finally had a moment to herself and called someone, presumably a family member. The young woman complained about being stressed because some of the contestants were undisciplined and making her job difficult. She also expressed her frustration at not having more free time to work on a documentary about urban wildlife, which she was passionate about. From this, Samuel gathered that Christina was a journalist who had always wanted to work in her field but had never had the opportunity due to her appearance. At that moment, the young heir realized that the world could be very unfair to those who didn't fit conventional beauty standards. Listening to Christina's sharp observations about the situation, he almost found her attractive. Catching himself, Samuel remembered why he was there in disguise. He wanted to find his future wife, someone he could marry and start a family with. Being young, handsome, and very wealthy, he couldn't settle for anything less than a stunningly beautiful woman to be by his side. Even though he acknowledged the world's injustice toward those who didn't meet traditional beauty standards, he wasn't the one to start a revolution. Samuel, who had initially planned just to observe the women's reactions to his beggar appearance, decided he needed to interact with them directly. He approached Vanessa and Gabriella, two of the contestants, and asked if one of them could spare some change to buy bread. Vanessa looked him up and down and replied, "If you want to eat, get a job. A dirty man like you shouldn't even be talking to beautiful women like us." Gabriella, on the other hand, was more sympathetic. She pulled a 5 real bill from her small purse and handed it to the beggar, smiling playfully as she asked if he was really going to buy food or if he wanted the money for alcohol. Samuel, who was mentally scoring each contestant, began to think that perhaps Gabriella was the ideal future wife. Smiling gratefully, he assured her that he needed the money for food, explaining that living on the streets meant relying on the kindness of strangers. Gabriella, still unconvinced, replied, "My boyfriend always says that even if you don't know if it's for food or drink, it's important to help others." The mention of her boyfriend made Samuel's smile fade. He couldn't believe that the kindest contestant he had met so far was already taken. But it made sense, someone as beautiful and kind as Gabriella was bound to be in a relationship. Samuel asked other contestants for spare change, but only 2 more offered him anything, while many ignored or mistreated him. As the filming day neared its end, Samuel noticed Christina sitting alone under a tree, looking sad. Despite having no real interest in her, he couldn't resist the urge to talk to her. Still dressed as a beggar, Samuel cautiously approached Christina, who jumped slightly when she saw his shadow. Expecting to be snubbed again, this time by a woman who wasn't even considered beautiful, Samuel was surprised when Christina laughed and said, "Sorry for being startled. I thought you were one of the contestants coming to ask me for something impossible. I'm so tired." Samuel smiled at Christina and replied, "I should be the one apologizing for scaring you by sneaking up so quietly." Thinking she was speaking to a real beggar, Christina said, "I saw you asking the contestants for money to buy food. I imagine they didn't give you much." "I don't have any money, but I have these sandwiches I brought for lunch. If you want, I can give you one." Samuel was amazed at how generous this woman was to a complete stranger, especially considering that she had been dealing with the contestants' antics all day because of him. At that moment, he felt a pang of guilt for what he was doing and considered telling Christina the truth. However, he knew that revealing his true identity could jeopardize his plan to choose a wife. So, Samuel sat down next to Christina under the tree and ate the sandwich she offered. Touched by the beggar's situation, Christina wondered if she could help him further. She asked if he would like to come to her house to take a bath. Since she lived with her older brother, she could lend him some clean clothes. When the beggar asked if her brother would be upset with this, Christina quickly reassured him that her brother was very generous and had even set aside some clothes for donation. Samuel accepted the invitation and then questioned why he had agreed to go to her house. Of all the women involved in the filming, Christina was the last person who would catch his interest, yet here he was, boarding a bus with her. The other passengers gave him disapproving looks, but Christina's conversation was so engaging that Samuel hardly noticed. When they arrived at Christina's house, Samuel saw that she lived in a simple place. It wasn't exactly ugly, but it lacked comfort. Being a television assistant didn't pay much, but despite the modest size and decor, the house had something special: the warmth and affection between Christina and her brother, Ricardo. Initially, Ricardo found it strange to see his sister with a homeless man, but when she explained that Samuel had shown up during the filming and needed help, Ricardo, as generous as his sister, assisted in welcoming the guest. Samuel took a bath and dressed in some of Ricardo's clothes that were destined for donation. During dinner, Ricardo couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen Samuel's face somewhere before. This impression grew stronger after the beggar had cleaned up, but where could he have seen him? Unable to pinpoint it, Ricardo decided to sleep, knowing he had to wake up early the next day. Before going to bed, Ricardo told Christina to let the beggar sleep in the living room and to lock her bedroom door in case he tried anything. Though she knew better than to bring strangers into the house, Christina wasn't afraid. She didn't think the beggar would harm her, but something about the situation still felt odd. As she lay down to sleep, Christina realized what seemed off about the whole scenario. Although Samuel was dressed like a beggar, he didn't act or speak like one. Perhaps this was because he hadn't always been homeless. Christina could never have imagined that the man who appeared so poor in his attire was actually the son of the television network's owner where she worked. The next morning, after having breakfast with Christina and Ricardo, Samuel asked his new friend if he could accompany her to the television studio area. Concerned that he might cause more trouble with the contestants, Christina asked him why he wanted to go there. Samuel replied that he just wanted to return to the place where he usually asked for help. Ricardo then asked Samuel if he was interested in getting a job. Keeping up his disguise, Samuel said he was, and Ricardo promptly offered to arrange an interview at the factory where he worked. The job would be on the assembly line, requiring diligence and attention. Samuel expressed interest but said he needed to return to the area where Christina had found him that day. Sensing the man's urgency to return, Christina agreed to take him, on the condition that he wouldn't ask the contestants for money. Samuel thought to himself that he wouldn't ask for money, but perhaps he might ask for one of their hands in marriage. It was a shame Gabriella already had a boyfriend, she had shown generosity and was also very beautiful. However, not all hope was lost. He might still find that one of the other women possessed all the qualities he desired. At that moment, Samuel realized that combining the appearance of any of the contestants with Christina's personality would result in the perfect woman. It was also a shame that the assistant wasn't more beautiful, but then again, as he looked at her more closely, Samuel shook his head to clear those thoughts. When Christina noticed his gesture, she laughed and asked what he was thinking about that had made him so averse. Embarrassed, Samuel replied that he was just lost in his own dreams. The two boarded the bus to the television studio. During the long ride, no one gave Samuel disapproving looks, as he was now clean and freshly bathed, all thanks to Christina and her brother. They got off at the bus stop near the studio, and Christina wished Samuel good luck, reminding him that her brother had offered him a job opportunity at the factory. Samuel promised that he would seek out Christina again. As soon as she entered the studio, Christina felt her peace and tranquility slip away. That documentary project about urban wildlife never seemed so distant. Once again, she had to guide the contestants to the park near the studio for more filming. Some of the scenes needed to be res-hot because they hadn't turned out well, partly due to the contestants not paying attention to her instructions. As they began filming again, Christina saw Samuel approaching the set. She couldn't believe that after everything she had done for him, the man was coming back to disrupt the filming again. As he got closer, better dressed than the previous day, his presence still caused dissatisfaction among several contestants. Laura, one of the most beautiful women in the competition, didn't hesitate to complain about being, in her words, harassed by a beggar. Samuel replied that he wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, the park was public, and he had the right to watch the filming. Carlos, who had been irritable since the day before, approached, ready to yell, but when he realized who the man was, his voice faltered. Fearing that his cover might be blown, Samuel quickly said, "I may be a beggar, but I still have the right to be here in a public space. Just because I'm a beggar doesn't mean I don't have rights." He emphasized the word beggar so that Carlos would understand not to ruin his disguise. Carlos, being clever, quickly realized that something was amiss. Despite being dressed as a homeless man, Samuel still managed to convey authority. Carlos then responded with feigned rudeness, "Well, Mr. Beggar, I can't kick you out of a public place, but I expect you to behave and not bother the girls." With a theatrically bad performance, Carlos ended the interaction with a not-so-subtle wink. Samuel was irritated, thinking about how poorly the director had acted, but he was still relieved that his disguise remained intact. Christina, watching the scene from a distance, found it strange that Carlos had backed down. Normally, that obnoxious little man would have continued yelling until security removed the beggar. But, at least for now, the situation was under control. The afternoon filming went relatively smoothly. Samuel tried to interact with the participants again, but the most he accomplished was eating another sandwich under a tree with Christina. The young woman asked if the beggar wanted to stay at her house. Again, but this time, Samuel declined. Without much explanation, he turned and walked away. Christina felt a mix of sadness and irritation at Samuel's indifference. The next day was hectic for Christina. The beauty contest would be broadcast live that night. In the morning, she had a quick breakfast with Ricardo and told him everything that had happened the day before. Her brother was also displeased to hear that their guest had treated his sister with such indifference. When Christina mentioned that despite Samuel living on the streets, he didn't behave like someone in need, Ricardo agreed. It was strange that the man spoke so well and had such good manners at the table. Ricardo continued to have a strong feeling that he knew Samuel from somewhere. Running late, Christina left the house in a rush, skipping her second piece of toast. Later, Ricardo, who had the day off from the factory, decided to visit his girlfriend, Nadia. Nadia loved hearing the stories about Christina's work that Ricardo shared with her. It was the closest she got to the world of television, and it was exciting. Ricardo liked to illustrate his stories with images from social media. To tell Nadia about the contest his sister was working on, he opened the television network's social media profiles. As he scrolled through the images, he came across a photo of the network owner's heirs. At first glance, Ricardo thought he was seeing things, but then he realized he was right. He had indeed seen Samuel before. Samuel's face was familiar because Ricardo often checked the network's social media profiles to keep up with the day-to-day happenings in television, which he then shared with Nadia. That's how he recognized Samuel's face. But now, he needed to figure out why this rich heir had disguised himself as a beggar and taken refuge in the home of a humble assistant. Ricardo decided he needed to tell his sister. He took a screenshot of Samuel's photo and sent it to Christina. However, busy breaking up a fight between two contestants who were twice her size, Christina didn't see her brother's message. The chaos only intensified as the competition neared its start time. Christina kept thinking that if she hadn't gone crazy by now, she never would. The contest began broadcasting live at 10 p.m. sharp. As the elimination rounds progressed, Christina had to be ready to break up fights between eliminated contestants and those still in the running. Many of the ousted contestants wanted to sabotage those who remained by ruining their outfits and hairstyles. Gabriella and Lays, the two contestants who had been kind to Christina, were still in the competition, and it was inevitable that she would root for one of them. However, Maria Luisa, who was also still in the running, was a strong competitor to beat. When it was down to the final three, it was announced that one of the network's heirs would come on stage to reveal the grand prizes. When Samuel walked onto the stage wearing a sharp, well-tailored suit, many people who had seen him as a beggar were shocked. Initially, Maria Luisa didn't recognize him as the homeless man she had treated poorly, but when she saw the surprise on Gabriella and Lay's faces, she quickly figured it out. Amused by the surprised looks on everyone's faces, Samuel flashed a wide smile and said, "My name is Samuel, and for the past 2 days, I've been living among the contestants without properly introducing myself." Christina, who was watching the show from behind the scenes, couldn't believe that the simple, poorly dressed man who had slept at her house was actually the network's heir. Thinking it was part of the contest, she wasn't even mad about Samuel's lie. Samuel then told the audience that he had disguised himself as a beggar to get to know the contestants better and was surprised by the generosity of some of them. He continued, "However, unfortunately, the world is still driven by appearances, and not everyone values people for who they are but rather for the clothes they wear." Without further ado, Samuel announced that the winner would receive a cash prize, a brand new car, and a scholarship for a university course of their choice. These were excellent prizes, and one of those 3 young women would soon be the lucky winner. Next, the presenters announced that Lays had placed third, leaving Maria Luisa and Gabriella as the finalists. Christina found it odd that Maria Luisa had made it to the final, considering she had treated Samuel, who she thought was a beggar, so poorly. How could she have scored well enough to make it to the final? Christina began to wonder if Samuel's speech was just a big lie. Even though he had criticized judging people by their appearance, he hadn't eliminated Maria Luisa from the competition. After a long commercial break, it was time to announce the winner of the beauty contest. Everyone was eagerly waiting to find out which of the 2 women would take home the crown and all the prizes. Christina smiled when she heard the presenters announce Gabriella's name as the grand winner. The young woman, who had always been kind to everyone on the show, was crowned the most beautiful of the competition. Maria Luisa tried to hide her sadness and anger. Then, Christina saw Samuel approach the runner-up and say something to her. Maria Luisa smiled and nodded. It didn't take long for Christina to hear that Samuel had asked Maria Luisa out. Behind the scenes, the rumor was that he wanted to marry and was looking for a beautiful wife. Since Gabriella, the winner, was already in a relationship, he decided to pursue the runner-up. At that moment, Christina was deeply disappointed. All she could think about was how shallow and deceitful Samuel was. If he had disguised himself as a beggar to see the contestants' true personalities beyond their appearances, why was he asking out the worst of them? At least the contest was over, and she could finally be reassigned to another project at the network. That's what she hoped for. Losing this job wasn't an option. As she was leaving the studio to catch her bus, Christina saw Samuel talking closely with Maria Luisa. Samuel noticed Christina walking away and thought he'd like to say goodbye to her. He ran after her, but Christina quickened her pace to avoid the conversation. Samuel began shouting for her to wait. She turned around and asked what he wanted. Noticing she was irritated, Samuel apologized for pretending to be a beggar. Christina looked him in the eyes and said, "I don't care about your poor performance as a beggar. What I can't understand is how disconnected your words are from reality." Samuel looked at her, confused about why she was being so harsh. Christina then nodded toward Maria Luisa. Samuel understood what she was trying to say and began to justify the unjustifiable. He said, "I realize that, unfortunately, I won't find everything I'm looking for in a woman. So, I decided to focus on beauty. Maybe it's a mistake to go out with Maria Luisa, but she's really a very beautiful woman." Christina responded, "Then you learned nothing from your experience as a beggar," and walked away. In the weeks that followed, Samuel started dating Maria Luisa, but not even her beauty could make him happy. She spent all her time bad-mouthing Gabriella and complaining about coming in second place. Whenever she started on this topic, Samuel thought about the conversations he had with Christina under the tree, eating sandwiches, or at her house. He made sure that Christina was transferred to the network's journalism department. Even though she had judged him harshly for his choices, he wanted her to have good career opportunities. From the information he received, Samuel learned that Christina was doing very well. After several attempts to muster the courage to talk to her, Samuel finally went to the department where she was working. Watching her from a distance, he realized that even though she didn't have the conventional beauty of a beauty pageant contestant, Christina was very attractive. That's when he understood that it had always been the disheveled assistant he had truly wanted. That day, he didn't talk to Christina. Instead, he rushed to find Maria Luisa and have a conversation with her. Maria Luisa was excited, thinking he was going to propose, but he broke up with her, explaining that they were too different. Maria Luisa was left confused. Samuel then went back to Christina with 2 sandwiches in a bag. He asked if she would like to have lunch with him under a tree, as they had done before. Confused but curious, Christina agreed. During their conversation, he asked if they could go out to get to know each other better. After a pause that felt very long, Christina said yes, but jokingly added that he would also need her brother Ricardo's forgiveness. Worried, Samuel asked if Christina's brother was upset, but she laughed and said it was just a joke. Her brother found it funny to see a rich heir trying to pretend to be a beggar. Samuel learned that he had also been wrong to judge people by their appearance, realizing that in the end, he had acted just like the contestants who had looked down on him when he was disguised as a beggar. I hope you enjoyed this story filled with twists and emotions. If you liked it and want more exciting narratives like this one, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a new adventure, and we're always ready to surprise you. Leave your comments about what you thought of the story and suggestions for future narratives. Until next time.